In our last video, we started to look into the life and career of the boy wonder Irving Thalberg. Since his accomplishments were so vast, Joe and I decided to split his story up into two parts. Today, we're going to look into Irving Thalberg's time at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, a period of incredible prosperity for the newly formed studio. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Also, become a member on Patreon to help us put out more videos like this. Now that that's out of the way, sit back, relax, and enjoy this new video. In 1924, Marcus Lowe combined three independent companies into one conglomerate. To run the day-to-day operations and oversee productions, he placed Louis B. Mayer and Irving Thalberg in charge. With Lowe's money, Mayer and Thalberg hired hundreds of talented filmmakers from every craft of the movie-making process. Thalberg himself knew that to run so many films at one time, MGM needed to cultivate a roster of talent. Some of the studio's earliest stars to work for the young producer were Renee Adoree, William Haynes, Mae Murray, Lou Cody, Greta Garbo, Lon Chaney Sr., Joan Crawford, John Gilbert, and a young woman who would make an incredible impression on Thalberg, Norma Shearer. Norma Shearer was a struggling actress, determined to make it in the film industry. Luckily, Irving Thalberg had caught wind of her and spoke to her agent, inviting her to the studio. While it took a few years, Norma Shearer was able to sign a contract with MGM. Reportedly, when Thalberg first met Shearer in person, she thought he was an office boy and asked him to take her to Irving Thalberg's office. Deciding to have a little fun, he played along and said yes, taking her to his office. When they got inside, he sat behind the desk and introduced himself as Irving Thalberg. The young producer always had to keep his medical condition in mind, even when his work schedule overwhelmed him. For example, when MGM was trying to complete the film Ben-Hur, a film they inherited during the merger, Louis B. Mayer ordered the film to be finished in California as opposed to Italy, given the production issues. Mayer had Thalberg oversee the production, and in 1925 was completed. But by the end of production, Thalberg collapsed with a heart attack. This caused Mayer to not only worry about his partner, but about the reality of eventually having to go on without him. As for Thalberg himself, he ignored his doctor's warnings and made sure to be at Ben-Hur's premiere, which was so successful it put MGM on the map. Some of the young producers' innovations was to preview films and asking audience members to fill out response cards to see if there was a way the film could be improved. Depending on their answers, certain scenes would either be re-edited or reshot. This improved the quality of every film immensely. Thalberg also produced many horror films, mainly starring his friend from Universal, Lon Chaney Sr. However, there were times when he was wrong about something. In 1927, Warner Brothers released The Jazz Singer, a film with synchronized talking. Irving Thalberg didn't think sound would last. Despite The Jazz Singer's success at the box office, he felt it was only a fad. Similarly, he felt the same way about color replacing black and white. This belief about sound in particular would be completely wrong, and it would cause MGM to be behind the other studios when they made the decision to convert to sound films. Despite the late start, Thalberg would focus all of his efforts to making the best sound films. 1927 also saw a more positive change in Thalberg's life. Norma Shearer became enamored with him and wanted to do whatever it took to marry him. While he saw his relationship with the young actress as professional, Norma felt differently. As I said before, she would do anything to be with him. She even converted to Judaism for him, and on September 29, 1927, Irving Thalberg married Norma Shearer. In 1929, the United States suffered a collapse on Wall Street that would bring about the Great Depression. MGM, for its part, made films to take people's minds away from the hardships of their daily lives. Irving Thalberg oversaw productions on films like Trader Horn, Tarzan the Ape Man, Grand Hotel, and Red-Headed Woman. Interestingly, Thalberg never put his name on any film he produced. He felt that credit you give yourself was not worth having. His hard work in cultivating talent also translated off-screen. On January 11, 1927, Irving Thalberg and 36 other members of Hollywood's film studios formed the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. When the Academy created what is now known as the Oscars, some of Thalberg's talent and films began winning award after award. For example, MGM's film, The Broadway Melody, the studio's first all-talking, all-dancing, and all-singing film, won Best Picture. Thalberg's wife Norma Shearer won Best Actress for her film, The Divorcee. Marie Dressler won Best Actress for Min and Bill. Lionel Barrymore won Best Actor for A Free Soul, and Helen Hayes won Best Actress for The Sin of Madeleine Claudette. The latter film has an interesting story to it. The Sin of Madeleine Claudette was originally called Lullaby. When it previewed in theaters, it went over badly and was shelved. When Irving Thalberg was checking the films that had been edited, he asked about Helen Hayes' film and was told what happened. He offered to look at it to see if it could be salvaged. After checking out the film himself, he realized that the last several minutes hurt it and decided that they should just film a new ending. He also changed the title from Lullaby to The Sin of Madeleine Claudette because he could use the word sin to market the film. Considering the film's box office and Helen Hayes winning an Oscar for her role, it's clear that he had a gift. By 1932, Irving Thalberg was not getting along very well with Louis B. Mayer. In the beginning, they had a great relationship, but their differing philosophies and tastes in films were slowly creating a lot of tension. At the end of the year, the young producer fell ill and had to take some time off. This allowed Mayer to install a committee of executives who would be in charge of their own production units. Mayer even got their boss, Nicholas Skank, to agree to this. Thalberg was furious at this because they were trying to drive him out. Whether it was this moment specifically or what he experienced when he came back, Thalberg was starting to make plans to eventually leave MGM and start his own independent production company. When he returned to the studio, things were never the same. He was no longer in charge of every MGM film, and his former producers now ran their own units. Despite this, Thalberg made sure that his films stood a cut above the rest. Some of the films that reflected this were Mutiny on the Bounty, starring Clark Gable. The film was so successful at the box office and was nominated for 6 Oscars, winning Best Picture. Another hit featured some of film history's greatest comedians, the Marx Brothers. This film was known as A Night at the Opera. Groucho Marx spoke highly of Thalberg in his later years. Joe and I want to share a clip we found of Groucho on the Dick Cavett Show. During the interview, he shares one of the funniest stories ever involving Irving Thalberg. Enjoy.
Is that incident true about Thalberg and you and your brothers?
He was rather an arrogant man. Arrogant isn't really quite the word, but he was a very serious man and a tremendously hard worker. And he always had 4 pictures going at one time. Mm-hmm. He was so busy, and I guess he knew he wasn't going to live long, and he wanted to do a lot while he was living. You know, he did Romeo and Juliet and those pictures. Well, I can't remember them, though, but we did 2 pictures with him. Night at the Opera and Day at the Races, and by an odd coincidence, they are by far the best pictures we ever did. And it was a severe loss to him, to us, when he died.
Yeah.
And, but he had so many writers working for him all the time that it was hard to get to see him. And I remember the first day we come in to see him, we had a call for 10 o'clock in the morning. And we sat there until 5 in the afternoon. We went out for lunch and came back and sat there. And we were humiliated. We've been big stars on Broadway in 3 musical shows, and to sit there and suffer this humiliation. So at 5 o'clock, he wanted to see us, and I said, no. We'll be here tomorrow morning again at 10 o'clock. But if you don't see us by 10:30, we're walking out, because we're not going to tolerate this kind of treatment. We don't need the movies. We can go back on the stage. So the next morning, we got on to see him, and at 10:30, he left. He was talking to some other writers on other pictures. Well, he did an enormous amount of pictures. And when he went out, Harpo went to the commissary and got some raw potatoes and brought them back. And we put the files, he had letter files. We put those up against the 3 doors of his magnificent office. And then we lit the big fireplace, a huge fireplace. And we got the fire going. We took off all our clothes. And we sat in front of the fire and toasted these Mickeys, they were called in those days. And later, about 2 hours later, he knocked on the door, and he wanted to come in. And we finally opened the door, and he saw the boys sitting there naked, eating these potatoes. And he never kept us late again after that. Everybody else was afraid of him. Because he had such prestige and power at MGM, but we didn't. We could have gone to vaudeville or back to Broadway or something.
Was he amused by you? Did he make him
Yes,
laugh?
he was amused by that. He liked us because we didn't take anything from him after that, you know. If he said something, I always argued politics with him. He was a hopeless reactionary politically, because I was a Democrat and he was a Republican. As soon as they get rich, they become Republicans. Thalberg was, I don't know if that's still true, but it was in those days. He was a poor boy from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And he went out there and he worked for Carl Laemmle, and he was a genius. And he was an office boy. Before you knew it, he was vice president, and MGM put him in charge of 3/4 of the studio there, and he became, they built a building for him out there.
The Thalberg
That's
building.
right, took off Garbo's hat.
Yeah.
But he loved us. He loved Chico particularly because he was a fanatical bridge player, and he loved to play bridge in the evening. And he had built a house by the ocean because he loved the ocean. But he had it soundproof so he couldn't hear the waves.
In 1936, Irving Thalberg put Romeo and Juliet into production, casting Leslie Howard as Romeo and his wife Norma Shearer as Juliet. Louis B. Mayer felt that William Shakespeare was, quote, box office poison. Thalberg felt differently and persisted with the film, trying to make it MGM's greatest film. At the time, it was one of the most expensive films ever made, and thus would not be able to turn a profit. This wouldn't matter though, because on the night of the Los Angeles premiere of Romeo and Juliet, Irving Thalberg died at the age of 37. The young producing wizard had been diagnosed with pneumonia, and his condition only got worse. His death sent shockwaves throughout the industry, as everyone from every level of filmmaking, both ally and rival, respected him and what he had accomplished. The day he died had hundreds of people in MGM in tears. They couldn't believe that someone who had been a huge part of their lives, who was credited as having been the main reason MGM was as huge as it was, had left them. Director Sam Wood, who was filming the Marx Brothers in A Day at the Races, broke down. Producer Samuel Goldwyn, who sold his company to Marcus Lowe during the original merger, wasn't able to attend the funeral, as he was reported as having wept uncontrollably for 2 days. On the day of the funeral, MGM for the very first time was closed out of respect for Thalberg. Among the thousands who came to the funeral services were the Marx Brothers, Charlie Chaplin, Walt Disney, Jean Harlow, Al Jolson, and even Thalberg's former enemy Erich von Stroheim. Stars who were not able to attend, though sent flowers, included the aforementioned Samuel Goldwyn, Greta Garbo, William Randolph Hearst, and Marion Davies. Over the next few days, an enormous amount of people paid tribute to Irving Thalberg. I would like to read some of these quotes. I think you'll be amazed by the last one. From Louis B. Mayer, he said he lost, and I quote, "the finest friend a man could ever have." From Nicholas Skank, Thalberg was the most important man in the production end of the motion picture industry. From David O. Selznick, beyond any question, the greatest individual force for fine pictures. From Samuel Goldwyn, the foremost figure in the motion picture industry and an inspiration. From M. H. Aylesworth, chairman of RKO, gifted with one of the finest minds ever placed at the service of motion picture production. From Harry Warner, co-founder and president of Warner Brothers, gifted with one of the finest minds ever placed at the service of motion picture production. From Sidney R. Kent, president of 20th Century Fox, he made the whole world richer by giving it the highest type of entertainment. He was a true genius. From Columbia president Harry Cohn, the motion picture industry has suffered a loss from which it will not soon recover. From Darrell F. Zanuck, more than any other man, he raised the industry to its present world prestige. From Paramount's co-founder and chairman Adolf Zukor, Irving Thalberg was the most brilliant young man in the motion picture business. Zukor's partner and Paramount co-founder Jesse Lasky, it will be utterly impossible to replace him. Finally, from President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the world of art is poor with the passing of Irving Thalberg. His high ideals, insight, and imagination went into the production of his masterpieces. As you can see, the entire film industry was affected by both the life and death of this man. His passing shut down the entire industry on the day of his funeral as a way of paying tribute to a man they all considered the boy wonder. Irving Thalberg's gift of combining classic literary masterpieces as well as famous Broadway productions into classic feature films was unmatched, possibly even to this day. His final film, The Good Earth, was released in 1937. Starring Paul Muni and Luis Reiner, the film opened with a tribute to Thalberg, the only time his name would ever appear on screen. It read, "To the memory of Irving Grant Thalberg, we dedicate this picture, his last great achievement." This film would earn Luis Reiner her second Oscar for Best Actress, a year after she had won for another of Thalberg's films, The Great Ziegfeld. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences would also pay tribute to the young producer in 1938 by awarding the newly created Irving G. Thalberg Memorial Award, which was made the year prior. The award was created to go to creative producers whose body of work reflect a consistently high quality of motion picture production. This award has become the hardest to win, as it's rarely given out. Among its recipients are Darrell F. Zanuck, the first winner, his son Richard D. Zanuck, Hal B. Wallace, Walt Disney, Samuel Goldwyn, David O. Selznick, Arthur Freed, Cecil B. DeMille, Stanley Kramer, Jack L. Warner, William Wyler, Alfred Hitchcock, Mervyn LeRoy, Billy Wilder, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and Francis Ford Coppola. Irving Thalberg was survived by his wife Norma Shearer and their two kids, Irving Jr. and Catherine. I've often wondered if he had not had his medical condition, would he have been as driven to reach the same levels of success that he did? Also, what would have happened if he had left MGM to form his own production company? Would it have become a major rival to the studios? While we'll never know the answers to these questions, one fact is clear. Irving Thalberg set a high standard for motion picture quality, a standard that many in the industry today have struggled to reach. The boy wonder left behind an incredible legacy that few can match, and everyone watching this should look back at the vast library of films he produced both at Universal and MGM. We hope you've enjoyed part 2 of our look into Irving Thalberg. Joe and I really enjoyed putting this together, and we encourage everyone to like, share, subscribe, and become patrons on Patreon. Stay healthy and stay safe. For Joe Lewis, I'm Big Rob, and we'll see you again soon.